Welcome to Sober Sunrise, a podcast bringing you AA speaker meetings with stories of experience, strength, and hope from around the world. We bring you several new speakers weekly, so be sure to subscribe. Whether you join us in the morning or at night, there's nothing better than a sober sunrise. We hope that you enjoy today's speaker.
Proud of you guys for coming back in here. Charlie Parker, alcoholic. Quick set-aside prayer. God, please help me to set aside everything I think I know about myself, the program, the big book, and even you, God, so that I can have a new experience. Help me to have an open mind so I could have a new experience. Help me to see the truth. Amen. Well, it's funny because I found myself about that chanting. At one point, I was going at the end of the deal. I would say optional chanting, and I thought, well, maybe that'll get the message. And Katie goes, "That's still chanting." And I was like, "Damn," because there's some guys at home that have started going, "Stay," instead of keep coming back, And I'm like, "Sorry, boys, that's still chanting, It's just different, Okay, This is going to be an interesting one. I hope it is, because this is a tough one to stay awake for. I really think there's a cruel irony to serving bean burritos to a men's retreat. Could make for an interesting evening. Let's go back to where we just were. Page 63. We've just done the third step prayer, and we've covered a lot of ground in there, and like I say, the whole emphasis of the way I'm going to approach the work from this point forward has changed in this information, and with the consciousness of this information and being able to break it down. And there's a exercise I've been working on where I call this like the hub, how when you look at, let's say Delta Airlines has a route map, and they have hub cities, and they have like Atlanta, and the flights to Dallas and St. Louis and Buffalo, and they're all drawn back to this hub city. And I've been working on a graphic where step 3, the deal we make in step 3, is like a hub. And throughout the rest of the book, there's a lot of places in my book where I've written restates the deal, restates step 3, because it's constantly reminding ourselves we're no longer running the show and saying, that sort of thing. There's a lot of places in the book where it refers back to this deal we made in step 3. And remember what it said the terms of the deal are. It says, we had a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provided what I need if I stay close to him and perform his work well. Step 1 drives me into this work. Step 2 is the solution. Step 2 and 3 is this decision to move into the solution. And then 4 through 9, what I say a lot of times is that it says if I stay close to him and perform his work well, these things are going to go like this. Well, I can't stay close to him until I get close to him. And I can't get close to this power if I'm blocked. So how am I blocked? I always, it's like there's this pipeline between me and this power, and that we've admitted is my only shot, is some relationship in consciousness of this power. Well, my pipeline is blocked with resentment and fear and self-delusion and self-pity and remorse and pride and a lot of those kinds of things. So what we're going to try to do in exercise in the steps 4 through 9 is remove what's blocking me from this power. Because obviously I can't stay close to this power until I get close to this power. And the way I get close to this power is removing what's blocking me between me and the power. I was Katie and I were doing a workshop up in New Jersey one time. And this woman, she came up and she goes, "Are you one of these people that believes in taking people through the steps really fast?" I was like, "No, I mean, not really fast, I mean, a week, 2 weeks. I don't know. I mean, it depends on how much time we got, and that sort of thing. But if I'm following the clear-cut directions in the book, there's some timing things that are mentioned in there. So, there's 2 references to when to do the 4th step, and so I think it's fair to tell the guy you can do it on the first time reference or on the second time reference or anywhere in between. That seems reasonable, doesn't it? Not riding his ass or anything. It says, next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action. I'll slow the steps down if you'll tell me how to launch myself slowly. I mean, like when you launch yourself across the bar, you can't really just kind of take your time about it. It says we launched out on a course of vigorous action. I used to think the course of vigorous action was the 4th step. Well, now I think it's 4 through 9 or 4 through 10, arguably, but probably, in there. And it says the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision, we're on the top of page 64, though our decision, what decision? That decision we just made in the 3rd step was a vital and crucial step. Vital means, critical to life. My vital organs, I can't live without them. It's saying that this 3rd step decision was vital and crucial, but it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in myself which are blocking me. So I can start this inventory process next, or at once, or anywhere in between. I keep looking for the place in the book where it says, now it's probably a good idea to just chill and make some meetings for a while. It says, a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in myself which are blocking me. Right? Blocking me from what? Blocking me from this power. So I had to get down to causes and conditions. Therefore, we started on a personal inventory. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. My first sponsor was a one inventory guy. He said, you only do one written inventory. If you do more than one inventory, you're just bragging. And stuff like that. And for a self-centered alcoholic like me, I don't have to hear that more than once. I didn't really dig the first one that much. So if you tell me I've only got to do one inventory, I'm out. It's like, okay. Looking back on it now, I really have come to believe that the only people that are saying you should only do one inventory are people who've only done one inventory. I've never met anybody yet that said, I've probably done 6 or 8 written inventories over the years, and I really should have quit at one. I was backing up with those last ones. It says a business which takes no regular inventory. Looking back on it, how much capacity did I really have to face and be rid of what was blocking me when I had 30 days of sobriety? That's triage. That's just trying to stop the bleeding and get the guy in touch with the power enough to get the drink off of him so we can kind of get down the road. And I'm a big believer in coming back and doing regular inventory. And there's a line here where it says, taking an inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. Remember when I said that Katie my wife, I think, is the best at hearing inventory of anybody I've ever seen. She's way better than I am. She goes a lot deeper than I do for a number of reasons. But I was talking to a buddy of mine up in Ocean City, Maryland, and he said, when you said that, he goes, there was a time when that wouldn't have made any sense to me. How could one person be better at hearing inventory, than another? And the way I hear inventory has really changed over the last few years. And there's a line here where it says taking inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing mission. And I've come to believe now that when I'm hearing inventory, my job is the fact-finding and their job is the fact-facing. Right? I do the 4th column with my guys a lot of time because I don't know if it's fair to expect them to be able to see it from an entirely different angle. And so we're going to talk about that. But it says, it's an effort to discover the truth about the stock and trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. And we're going to come back to that line quite a bit, where it says to get rid of them promptly and without regret. And it says if I'm going to be successful, I can't fool myself about values. It's always imagine that, let's say I got a stereo business, and we're doing inventory, and I've got, anybody old enough to remember Craig Power Play tape decks? When that was the lick, back in the, and we're doing inventory, and it says I can't fool myself about values, and I got, a whole shelf back here full of Power Play 8-track tape players, and I'm going, oh, these are righteous, and these are really worth keeping, and my partner's going, they're crap, we got to get them out of here and get some Blu-ray players in here and that sort of thing. I can't fool myself about some of these old ideas I got, and it says we did exactly the same thing with our lives. Now here's something interesting. It says we took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup. We being the founders. They're telling me what they did. They're saying what they did. The first thing they did was they searched out the flaws in their makeup which had caused their failure. If I missed that line on page 60 for 17 years, you know how I said I like to read the book and only look for things that I already agree with? Well, I shined on the line that said the first requirement is that I be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. If I missed that line, I've read the book a few times. If I missed that line, what did I do when I got to a line like this where it says, being convinced that self manifested in various ways was what had defeated us? We considered self's common manifestations. I was thinking about potato chips or something when I read that line, because I skipped that line just like I did the other one. Am I convinced that self manifested in various ways was what defeated me? It's saying, and we're back to what I call a fair question for the new guy to ask, If I can just see the new guy going, okay, all right, I'm following you. You're telling me that self and self-centeredness and those sort of things are what has defeated me, and above everything, I got to get rid of it. I don't get it. I don't know what I'm looking for. What do you mean when you say, how does self manifest? It's saying, how does it show up? I don't understand what I'm supposed to be watching for. I can't see self in me. I can tell you one thing that I've observed about this whole self business and selfishness. When you start focusing on manifestations of self and selfishness and that sort of thing, the first place it's going to come blindingly obvious is in others. The first place that I can really see selfishness is in the guys in my home group. Oh, for God's sake, I can spot it in my sponsees like crazy. I am completely blind to it in myself. That's what we talk about a lot. But it's unbelievable how obvious it is to me in my sponsees. And then I'll call my sponsor and I'll tell him a situation and he'll hand it right back to me. And I just go, oh my God. How can I be that blind to it? I know. Well, it's because I'm driven by my motives and my delusion and these sorts of things. If you just let me tell you the story, I understand that on first blush it looks a little selfish. But if you let me tell the story, you'd understand. If you think it's selfish, it's probably just because you didn't really hear the story properly. So, I'm always wanting to lay out the big story, We speak in big, long stories. God speaks in little bitty short sentences, But I like the long story. But so it says, how does it describe in the fourth step or the inventory process? It says we considered it's being self. If self is what defeated me, we considered self. So all the fourth step is, but based on that, is a consideration of the common manifestations of self. Right? If you're telling me self is what defeated me, how does it show up? Sorry, guys, I got to throw another log on that air conditioner. How does self show up? So what are we looking at here? And it says, so now we got the new guy saying, what am I looking for? You with me on that so far? Everybody, okay, somebody nod your head. I feel like I'm talking to cardboard cutouts out here, I know we just had lunch. But so if you're saying, well, how does self show up? It says, well, resentment's the number one offender, right? Let's look at that as a manifestation of self. It says it destroys more alcoholics than anything else. Even alcohol. Isn't that weird? Resentment destroys more alcoholics than anything else. It destroys more alcoholics than alcohol does. And we were talking about it at lunch. There's story after story of people that had major influences on the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they were only around for a couple of years, and we lost them behind resentment. Hank Parkhurst, AA number 3 in New York, Big Book probably wouldn't have gotten written without Hank, and he wound up with a resentment and was gone in a couple of years. The guy that brought AA to Texas brought AA there in 1940, started everything, wrote some articles that got sent into GSO, and they used to mail them out as pamphlets. The articles were so good. He was running a group there that was doing it properly, and then some Nimrod from the Northeast came down and said, well, up there, we use a group conscience, and we vote on everything. And they had a vote, and the vote went in the way he didn't want it to go. And he left the group with a resentment and drank and was dead. So he brought AA to Houston in 1940, newly sober, and he was dead by 1943. But, when it says resentment destroy more alcoholics than anything else, it says from resentment stems all forms of spiritual disease. For we've been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. This is the first place where it really talks about the spiritual malady. And it says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. It's interesting. I've got a physical allergy coupled with a mental obsession, but we don't address it on the physical side or on the mental side. We address it on the spiritual plane, and we straighten out physically and mentally. It's kind of interesting. We kind of flank it. We don't go after it directly. And it says, remember those clear-cut directions that it promised me? It says, in dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed the people, institutions. If you slow this down and break it down, first of all, I'm going to set them on paper. And then it says we listed people, institutions, or principles. Anybody ever look at this 3-column thing in here and go, what? Mr. Brown, and she's a nut, and, that kind of stuff. There was a time when I didn't get it, and I'm looking at it, and I didn't realize that it goes down like that. I don't write them across the page like that. And if I break these down into clear-cut directions, it says we listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we're angry. Bang. I stop right there, and I write down people, institutions, or principles with whom we're angry. A lot of times when I'm doing the inventory, I just take a spiral notebook. I'll draw a line down this part of the page and a line down this part of the page. I'll put another little line right here to make a little bitty box here that I'll talk about in a little bit. And so we got really 4 columns and one little check box. The first column is people, institutions, and principles with whom I'm angry. And I write it down, I skip a couple of lines. I write it down, I skip a couple of lines. And I write it down, and I write down all the people that I'm pissed off at. And then it comes back and it says, we asked ourselves why we were angry. Write down what they did, right? Why I'm mad at them. And it goes on to talk about the things that were threatened, hurt or threatened. And it says I write down that it affected my self-esteem, my security, my ambitions. When I talk to guys about ambitions, I just say, ambitions for our purpose just means the way I wanted things to turn out. And did this have a bad effect on the way I wanted things to turn out? My personal relations, my sex relations. And it says we're as definite as this example. So the reason I tell them just skip a line or two is because we're not writing the great American novel here. Right? I'm just writing down who I'm mad at, what they did, and we're using bullet points. And my favorite example is Mr. Brown. You look at Mr. Brown, check out Mr. Brown. He says, his attention to my wife. It's a problem. All right? He's hitting on my wife. And what did he do? He told my wife I have a mistress. Major guy code violation. And he's trying to get my job at the office, right? The best AA T-shirt I've ever seen was one that said, Mr. Brown needs his ass kicked. I mean, you look at this guy, he's hitting on his wife, he's told her he's got a girlfriend on the side, and he's trying to get his job, and he got 19 words in the second column. It's just bullet points. We're going to write down, dad, inattentive, non-approving, judgmental, just little bullet points, and we'll talk about it in the fifth step. We're going to fluff it out in the fifth step. But then, we write down what it affects, and it talks about the third dishonesty. I got to move because I got some ground I want to cover. But because really, most of us know how to do this. It goes over on the next page and it talks about how these resentments will kill me, and it says, how they shut me off from the sunlight of the Spirit. Do I believe that? Do I really believe that these resentments shut me off from the sunlight of the Spirit? And then it goes on it says, if we're going to if we were to live, we had to be free of this anger. So this is really only important for the ones of us that want to live. And it says the grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. And that's that one where I was talking about. Brainstorm means rage and being grouchy. And it goes on. But I think there's a lot of power in the written stuff in the fourth step, but there are some exercises in here that I've never seen on fourth step guides. And most fourth step guides don't cover this exercise right here, and it is hugely powerful. It says, we turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. Now imagine if I'm doing inventory with somebody, and I go, you know what, Bill, in my pocket, I have the key to your future. Would you go, nah, I pass? It says the list holds the key to my future. And this is an exercise I've never seen on any four-step guide. It says, we were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. And I've written in there, am I? And I ask guys, I go, are you willing to look at this resentment from an entirely different angle? And and then they go, yeah, and I'm going to tell you a story about one, but it says, we began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had the power to kill. How could I escape? It says, how could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? I can't wish them away any more than I could alcohol, right? That's the bad news about self. I can't get rid of myself. And I can't quit playing God without God. I've got to have this power to be able to move me beyond this stuff because it's the only way I know how to operate. And here's where it says, this was our course. Right? This is what I'm saying. This is what we did as the founders. It says, we realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. This is a little exercise I'll do with guys where I go, is it possible? There's that path of consideration again. That the people who wronged you on there, is it possible that this is the best they could do? That they were spiritually sick, just like I am. Two people suffering from, because the problem is when like I was saying, when I screw up, I got a story to go with it. I got motives, I got delusion, but it's really not that bad. But now when you screw up, it's an outrage, and I demand justice. So am I willing to cut this guy the same amount of slack that I'd be asking for if I was the one that in column one? And a lot of times I'll do that in inventory with guys where we're going along and I go, have you ever been this guy in column one? Have you ever been the one that was, hitting on the married chick or whatever, and it builds some compassion. It's a lot easier sometimes to get a guy to forgive his parents when he's had children of his own, because I know with my kids, I hope that they'll judge me on the body of my work and not choose the one or two isolated incidences where I acted like an idiot. Well, maybe not, maybe more than one or two. But I'm thinking surely they'll judge me on the body of my work and not just these one or two instances. But I do exactly the opposite with my parents. I want to pick out the one or two times where they fell short, and how that affected me. And it says, we realized the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we didn't like their symptoms, that's column 2, and the way they disturbed me, column 3, they, like me, were sick too. Here's a clue. In the big book, when it says we asked, it's usually a prayer. And if it says we asked God, it's always a prayer. Right? But I'd never done any of these prayers when I was going through the inventory process before. And you hear people talking about pray for the people you resent. Well, it's not a bad exercise. It's from one of the stories in the back, but it's not what the book is saying to do here. I can pray for the people I resent if I want to, but I got to say 2 prayers, because here it says, who are we praying for? It says we ask God to help us. Show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. And when I looked up pity in that old dictionary, it was more like compassion. And it was less of that, bless their little pointed heads. It's a compassion of 2 people suffering from the same human condition. Am I willing to grant them the same compassion that I would grant a sick friend? And I think about, if an example I use is like if a couple's having a baby and they're in the delivery room and she's screaming at him saying, "You son of a bitch, you'll never lay another hand on me. Look at what you've done to me," and stuff like that. Well, that's a compassionate moment. The guy's going to be going, "Oh, now come on, honey, let's do our little Lamaze stuff. Let's do the breathing. We're going to get through this all," well, because he's got that compassion there. Now, a year later, it's the same 2 people and it's the same language, except now she's at the kitchen sink and he's in the lazy boy and she's saying, "You son of a bitch, you'll never lay another hand on me. I hate you for what you've done to me." A little different. There's no compassion. There's no thought of what's driving her or what she's driven by or what she's afraid of and that sort of thing. It's just like, I don't roll that way. And, well, that's what it's saying. Am I willing to grant them this same compassion? And I have to ask God to show me how to do that. And it says, when a person offended, we said to ourselves, "This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done." And I've written right here, restates step 3. When we talk about them being sick, it just means they're spiritually ignorant. They can't do any better, just like I can't do any better sometimes. We avoid retaliation or argument. Why? We wouldn't treat sick people that way, because if we do, it would destroy our chance of being helpful. If I get in a beef with some guy at the AA club and I call him a bunch of names and I'm retaliating and arguing, I'm not the guy he's going to come to when he needs help. And he realizes, and it's the same way across the board. He says, I destroy my chance of being helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but here's a huge promise. It says, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. I've been working on that with a lot of sponsees, because there'll be beefs with people. And I say, it's interesting. It says God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. But it also implies that I can't do that on my own power. My default position is not that kindly and tolerant view, but God will show me how to do that. But I got to go to Him, and we're going to talk about that a lot. Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds, this is what I call the 4th column. I don't care whether you call it the 3rd column, the 4th column, an expanded 3rd column, a 5th column, whatever you want to call this exercise on page 67. It's a critical part of the resentment inventory. And it says, putting out of our minds the wrongs others have done. Now, we're not talking about my part. It says, I've put them out. It says, I look for my own mistakes. Where have I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation hadn't been entirely my fault, I try to disregard the other person involved entirely. Mark used to say, if you're in a beef where you've only got 20% of the responsibility for the beef in this 4th column, I got to take 100% responsibility for that 20%. We're not talking about them anymore. Where were my mistakes? Where was I selfish, dishonest? And I was doing an inventory with Myers one time, who's my sponsor now, and he's going, well, you can always get selfish out of it. And I'm like, really, how? And he goes, well, let me ask you this. Had this person done exactly what you wanted them to do, exactly when you wanted them to do it, in just exactly the manner you wanted them to do it, would you still be resentful? At first I thought it was a trick question. And then I went, no. And he goes, that's selfish. Right? All they have to do for you to not resent them is do exactly what you want them to do, exactly the way you want them to do it. And like I said, the rules might be different tomorrow, and I won't tell you, but I need for you to do it exactly the way I wanted it to do. I want to be resentful, And then under dishonesty, Mark one time, I said, Mark, I'm not seeing dishonesty in all this stuff because I don't really just outright lie much anymore. And I love this story. There was a guy that was speaking in Texas, and he said, God, before I got sober, I would just lie for no reason. He said, I'd lie when the truth makes a better story. And he said, but now that I'm sober and I'm working these steps, he says, I don't lie anymore unless it's absolutely necessary. But it says, Mark said there's three forms of dishonesty. There's lying, just straight up lying. There's lying by omission. Whoops. That's one of my toolkit right there. And then he said there's delusion. And delusion is where I'm lying to myself. And man, when I started looking at delusion as a form of dishonesty, it blew this column wide open. Because, like one time I'm writing inventory on a sponsee. I'm mad at this sponsee. Why? Well, because he's self-centered. He talks over me all the time. When I start reading a line out of the book, he wants to quote the line out of the book to show me that he knows what, already knows what I'm trying to tell him. He makes appointments and cancels them at the last minute. He makes commitments to write inventory and then he doesn't do it, and this sort of thing. And so I do the sick man exercise. Are you willing to look at them as the whatever form of spiritual condition they're in now? And when I get into the fourth column, I'm looking at it and I go, Charlie, is it possible that it's a little bit delusional to expect this new guy not to act like a new guy? Who's the old timer here? This guy, what you wrote in column 2 is the definition of a newcomer, and I'm outraged by it, a little delusional, it happens all the time where this delusion, it really shows up. The power of this process, and the reason I like to talk about it so much, is because it really has the potential to rewrite history. I can go back in my life and completely re-experience things. When it says fancied or real, this can change my childhood. This can change the marriage that I had. This can change, because you look at stuff and my job though is to be able to show them this fourth column. And I've had exercise after exercise where Mark used to say the fourth column properly done turns the second column into a lie. And the first time he said that, I'm like, what does that mean? I know the second column. How are you going to turn it into a lie? I saw it happen. That's why I'm writing it down. That's why I'm pissed off, is because of what happened in the second column. I can tell you stories where you just go, wow. One of them, the guy just called me at lunch to tell me, one of my buddies just died this morning. A guy that was my roommate, and we were running buddies in sobriety, and he relapsed with about 9 years. I never did make it back, and he finally died this morning. And this Roy guy called me. God bless you, Mike. Roy was this guy, and I'm doing inventory with Roy, and he comes to me, and he's got this resentment, and it says, my dad. First, it's pretty common that dad is going to be, like dad, mom, siblings, exes, are going to be in column 1. He says, my dad. And in column 2, what happened? Well, when I was 12, he says, I was sitting he's told me it's okay to tell this story. I'm not just like reading stuff out of people's fifth stuff, But he says, when I was 12, I was sitting on the front steps at my house, and my dad walks by me and he goes, your mom killed herself today. And he walks on in the house. And he's sitting there going, how could anybody be that heartless, that thoughtless, to just lay that on a 12-year-old kid? And, with no, compassion. And you can get a lot of support for that in AA. People saying, oh man, that's some bullshit. You deserve a lot better than that. You have counselors sometimes going, you know what, your dad is toxic. We need to just set a boundary there, and you should detach, from your dad, and so we go at it from a little different angle, and I'm looking at it and I go, are you willing to look at this from an entirely different angle? And he goes, yeah. And I said, are you willing to look at your dad as perhaps spiritually sick? I said, now let's talk about this situation. I said, how many kids, when I talk about this fact-finding and fact-facing mission that we were talking about, sometimes when I'm hearing inventory now, I'm like a news reporter. It's like I'm gathering information from this guy, and I go, so where were you living? He was living in Lockhart, Texas. And I said, and how many kids in your family? And he says, 3. And I said, where did you fall in that group? I was the oldest, okay? And your parents are living together. What kind of work did your dad do? He was a welder. So how was the money situation? Well, it was okay, but we weren't rolling in it, but we weren't, starving either, and I said, and we're talking about this, and so as we start shaping the story, and I'm talking about looking at it from an entirely different angle, and what I call the sick man exercise, I go, let's look at this for a second. I said, now your dad at this time, you're 12, so your dad is like, early 30s, right? Early to mid 30s, and he's been married for a while to a woman with severe mental illness. And it's just been hell in the house, but he's holding it together. And there have been times in the past where she's tried to harm herself. And on this day, she has successfully killed herself. Now, your dad is at work. He's got to leave work. He's got to come home. He's got to notify all the family members that his wife killed herself. And he's got to face all that judgment that goes with that. He's got to let everybody in this little town of Lockhart, Texas know that his wife killed himself. He's got to plan a funeral. And in the middle of all that, he's got to figure out how to try to make a living and raise 3 children by himself. I said, is it possible? I just heard myself saying this. I said, is it possible that on that day, given your dad's background and his tools for dealing with life and whatever was driving him, is it possible that on that day, walking by you and saying your mom killed herself today was the best he could do? And Roy goes, God damn it. I never thought about that for a second. That's the level of selfishness that I'm carrying around. It never occurred to me to think about what was driving this guy or what's going on with him. And in that moment, I watched a 40-year-old resentment go, just like that. Come into this deal with a resentment, come out of it with an amends. I sat there and watched him go, holy shit. I've been waiting 40 years for my dad to come and apologize to me. I got to go find my dad tomorrow and apologize to him. That's the power of this process. That's the power of rewriting history. All of a sudden he's going, oh my God. And I've sat there, I had a kid in Newport that I was going through this process with, and we do one, and then we do another one. And my favorite thing to hear when you're doing that entirely different angle in the 4th column is when they go, oh my God. And he did it in the first one. And he did it in the second one. And he did it in the third one. And about the 4th one, he goes, Charlie, I'm really a pretty good guy. I know I'm looking really bad here in this 4th column, but I'm really a pretty okay guy. And that's how, when it talks about turning the 2nd column into a lie, I've seen it happen over and over and over again. One time I was doing a men's retreat in Idaho. And we flew into Salt Lake, and they picked us up, and we're going to drive up to Lava Springs and do this men's retreat. And they send this guy to pick us up, and he's a good guy. We're riding along, and we're talking about this whole 60 to 63 thing and the selfishness and self-centeredness piece. And we go to lunch, and at lunch at this guy's house, I really love these guys. This is a hell of a crew because they would serve lunch every Friday and get the newcomers in there and then pounce on them with, the big book. And I was like, I admire that, but he's talking after lunch and he's talking like we talk, and he goes, oh man, my first wife, God almighty. That chick was nuts, and then as he's talking all further, second wife, whew, she was off the chain, and just crazy as hell. And then this chick I just broke up with about 4 months ago, and boy, was she whack, and I'm listening to him, and I go, mind if I ask you a couple of questions? And he goes, no, and his sponsor's sitting there with us, he goes, no, go ahead. And I said, well, how do you find yourself in a relationship with all these crazy women? And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, I'm just thinking, I'd like to offer you consideration. I mean, were they crazy when you started dating them? Or is it possible that the only difference between the way they were when you started dating them and the way they were when you broke up with them was the effect of spending that amount of time with somebody as selfish and self-centered as you are? And his sponsor sit behind him, and his sponsor goes, "Say that again." We get out to the car, and I had this guy, Jay, that I sponsored with me. And we get out in the car, and he goes, "Damn!" And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Oh my God!" He goes, "We've been in town like an hour," and you're just like, boom! And I was like, "That's my job, man. I'm the out of town guy. I come in, drop the bomb, get out of here." But it's the same way with me. If you'd have asked me what happened in my first marriage, what I would have told you for a long time is she cheated on me and she was crazy, and I don't roll like that. I caught her having an affair on me, and that was it. And you can get plenty of support for that. Looking back on it now, going through this work with this focus on the way we're talking about it now, there's a very good chance that I would tell you it's very likely that I exhibited a level of selfishness and self-centeredness in that relationship that would have driven anybody crazy and driven anybody out the door. That's rewriting history. That's me having to go back and make amends to her, and there's a lot of healing that has taken place out of being able to see that. I've had situations in my life where I didn't see the selfishness in sobriety, where I didn't see the selfishness and self-centeredness in it for 15 years. Where you've got a beef that's been going on with somebody for 15 years, and you look up and as a result of this work, and you go, "Oh my God, could I be any more selfish and self-centered?" That's me operating on my best skills sober, without being involved in this work. I don't know how you do that by only doing one inventory. I do it by going back and doing the inventory over and over again. I do a lot of stuff in the 10th step. But if something bothers me for 2 or 3 days, I got to write inventory on it, And I see it all the time where you guys get so mad they'll fire their sponsor, or they'll leave, or they'll quit a job, or they'll, and then you go, "Did you write inventory on it?" And you're like, No, it wasn't that bad. I don't have the power to see this stuff from an entirely different angle. And the thing about it is, I can sit there and hand it out to my sponsees, and I'm still blind to it in myself. There was one where Katie had said something at a conference that somebody took issue with, and she'd used the word predator and how women are the predators in AA, and somebody took that the wrong way, and they would send her an ugly email, and so Katie's not really a wordsmith, so I'm going to write an email to these people and respond, and there's no position of neutrality here, and so I'm talking about, all she was saying was that women in AA can take care of themselves, and they do, because what happens a lot of times is they'll come over to the men in AA and they'll go, "He's bothering me," and we go, "Who's bothering you?" And I've got my sword and my shield and my white stallion, and I'm going to come over and these chicks have been taking care of themselves for a while. If she can handle 6th Street in Austin, she can handle a predator in AA. But I'm writing out this whole. It takes me about 45 minutes to type it out because I don't type very well, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant. But there's not an unsend button on the computer, So I've learned to kind of go, let's hold on just a minute before we send it. And I call Mike Lorenz, and I'm going to run it past him, and I read the whole email out to him, about the whole thing, and then he goes, "Can I ask you one question?" And I said, "Sure." And he goes, "When you wrote that email," I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Were you mounted on your white stallion?" I was like, "Oh my God." I'm sitting there doing exactly what I'm saying that she's saying that they don't need, but I'm blind to it in myself. I got to have somebody that's taking me back to this level of stuff and looking at that sort of thing. I love that sick man exercise and this entirely different angle, and it's a powerful exercise, and it says, where was I to blame? The inventory was mine, not the other man. When we saw our faults, we listed them. I've heard people say there is no fourth column. I don't know what you want to call this, but it does say when we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. Whatever you want to call it. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. That resentment inventory comes up for me all the time. Then it rolls into, so we've looked at resentment as a manifestation of self. You with me on that? Right? It's changed for me. It changed the whole approach. Remember last night I said I thought I was writing inventory. My first 4-step was just kind of a confession. Right? Just sit down with the guy and tell him all the bad stuff I ever did. There was no focus on any of this. And I sat there and read my inventory to him. And at the end of it, he goes, "You're a very selfish person." I'm like, okay. This is taking it to a little bit deeper level. What's next? What's another way the self manifests for a guy like me? It says, notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside all these resentments. This short word somehow touches every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. Check this out. Evil and corroding thread, the fabric of our existence was shot through with it. We were studying this page at Primary Purpose Group one night. I know what shot means. I'm a competitive shotgun shooter. I'm picturing some piece of fabric that's been shot, through with fear or something like that. But for some reason I hear myself saying, look up the word shot, please. And so the guy gets out the dictionary and he reads it, and it says, a method of weaving using warp and web where the fabric takes on a different appearance based upon the viewpoint of the observer. Whoa. And we call it a Cheech and Chong moment at PPG where everybody goes, whoa. So now what it's saying about fear is that, like a sharkskin suit, or a silk rug, how they look different, but it's saying that the fabric of my existence is not only is it shot through with fear, but it can also change the way things look based on how I'm looking at it. Pretty heavy. I'd read that page more than once that night, and it says, fear set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve, but did not we ourselves set the ball rolling. I don't have time to really go into what a self-fulfilling prophecy is, but I'm the guy that will sit there and I'm scared my girlfriend's going to cheat on me, and I'm scared she's going to cheat on me, and I ride her ass, and I don't want her going out in public, and I don't want her going to the mall, and I'm questioning everything she does till finally she can't take it anymore. And when she leaves, I go, I knew it. I was right the whole time, right? But it's saying, didn't I set the ball rolling? Didn't I set in, and here's one. It says, sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. I used to read that and I'm going, I don't understand what they mean by fear ought to be classed with stealing. It doesn't really make sense to me. But my buddy Bob in Las Vegas said he was sitting in a hospital room with an old timer that was dying. And the guy was talking to Bob, and he goes, Bob, he says, when you get in the home stretch and you're looking back over your life, he goes, it's not the mistakes that I made that I deeply regret. It's the things I was afraid to try. And in that way, fear robs me of the relationship I might have been able to have, of the relationship with my children I might have been able to have, of the marriage I could have had, of the career I could have had, because I'm afraid to try this stuff, When I was dating, I was so scared of rejection that the only way I was going to ask a girl out was if she had those flashlights from the airport, was going, bring it right in here, boy, because I'm scared, and it's just, fear robs us of these sorts of things. Well, the fear inventory, I've seen inventories where the fear inventory looked just like the resentment inventory. I don't mind a 4-step guide if it follows the language of the big book. But I want guys to be, one of the beautiful things about AA is not only will it bring about this spiritual awakening, it's also very easily duplicatable. When you do the work out of the book, it's real easy to show somebody else how to do the work out of the book, and I don't have to scramble around and get the Hazelden guide and all these different guides, and it says. But I've never seen one where it's laid out like this. I've never seen one that had the sick man exercise on it, and then here's one, and it says. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper. So we write down our fears, even though we got no resentment in connection with them. And then it says we asked ourselves why we had them. So we can put that down if you want. I'll let the guy do that as an exercise. But it's going to give me the answer in the next sentence. It says, wasn't it because self-reliance failed me? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other problem. When it made me cocky, it was worse. So I'm writing down these fears, and it says that wasn't it because self-reliance failed me? I had a sponsor call the other day. He goes, "Well, self-reliance is really failing me. I'm in a lot of fear about these job interviews and that sort of thing." I said, "Well, the thing about self-reliance is the only time it can fail me is when I'm in self-reliance. If I'm in fear, it's because self-reliance is failing me." And it says, perhaps there's a better way. We think so, for we are now on a different basis. The basis of trusting and relying upon God. So over in the third step, I'm on the basis of self-will. I'm almost always in collision with something or somebody. Over here, I'm on the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. The way I do a fear inventory a lot of times, I think, and Katie doesn't like this, but she's not here. So I do this thing I call the fear sphere, and it's like in my world, there's this little sphere of things that I have control over, like when I'm going to go to bed, what I'm going to wear, how much, what I'm going to have for lunch. I mean, clearly I don't have a tremendous amount of control over that, but, there are things in my life that on the basis of self-will, I can control these things. That's a finite amount of things, though, that I can control. Outside that sphere are a whole bunch of things that I can't control. And on the basis of self-will, those things scare me. Because I know at some level that even though I'm running the whole show, and when you look at a fear list with a guy that's written down, we'll write down, cancer, getting sick, growing old, wife leaving me, going broke, how my kids are going to turn out, am I going to, these sorts of things. And when you go, and I go back down the list with that guy, and I go, let me ask you a question. These things here, tell me, are they inside your area of control or outside your area of control? Cancer, outside. Going broke, outside. Whether or not Katie's going to leave me, outside. How my kids are going to turn out, outside. On the basis of self-will, that crap scares me. And it's saying now, but on this, it says now we're on a different basis. We're on the basis of trusting and relying upon God. And it says, just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us, and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. One time I had a guy, he says, "Charlie, how do I know what God's will is?" It's an interesting question. I said, I don't really know a lot of times what God's will is, but I'm usually fairly clear on what it isn't. And I said, how about for now, we don't do what clearly isn't God's will, and assume that everything else is our best shot at it. God will take up the slack. I didn't even realize that that's what it's saying in the book. It says, just to the extent that we do as we think God would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. Right? Well, it says, we never apologize for God. Instead, we let God demonstrate through us what He can do. I looked up demonstrate in that old dictionary one time, and you know what it said under demonstrate? It said to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. To prove to a point that the opposite viewpoint is rendered absurd. So it's saying, and demonstrate was a big word in the Oxford movement. They used it a lot. And it's saying, but we're going to let God demonstrate through me that the basis of relying on God works. And in fact, it works to the point that relying on self is rendered absurd. Does that make sense? It's heavy stuff. It says, we ask him, that sounds like a prayer. We ask him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. At once, we commence to outgrow fear. To me, that's the fear exercise. And then it goes into the sex inventory. And the first paragraph talks about kind of the spirit we take into the sex inventory. It says many of us needed an overhauling there, which basically means to examine thoroughly. And it says we try to be sensible. It's ways that are easy to run to extremes. But what we're looking at in this third inventory in the fourth step is manifestations of self-centeredness when the sexual instinct is aroused. Probably doesn't happen with you guys, but I tend to get a little selfish around sex. One time I even said something that wasn't true. I'm going to love you forever, honey. It says, one school says everything goes one way, one says, have all this. It says we want to stay out of this controversy. We don't get to be the arbiter of anybody's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? It's funny. It says I don't want to be the arbiter. The thing is, what we're trying to do in this exercise is set a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. And, one of the ways that I get into trouble is when it doesn't matter what my mother's values are for me, if they don't match up with mine, or what your values are, but when I operate outside of my own value system, I get in trouble. When I start doing things that I think are wrong, it troubles me, right? And how am I going to know what my values are if I don't ever establish them? If I don't ever have a look at them, if I don't have any idea, I'm not going to know when I'm going over the line. A sane and sound ideal, it can be a moving target. I've sponsored this kid that was a college student at UT, single, looked like he was carved out of wood. His sound ideal is a little different from me as a 57-year-old married guy. This guy's getting laid more than the Dallas Cowboys. And it's not my job to tell him how that's supposed to go. He's got to establish a sane and sound ideal for his sex life, so he'll know when he's operating outside of his values. And I watched it move around for him and that sort of thing. It says, we reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had I been? There's 9 questions that we ask ourselves here. It says, where had I been selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate? Whom had I hurt? Right? And it's not always just the person I had sex with. Sometimes it could be their husband. Sometimes it could be their kids. Sometimes it could be, whatever. I've blown up whole, situations that, around sex drive, a little short-sighted. I got a great line, but I'm not going to say it in a monastery. Did I unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, bitterness, right? And I got to look at, is my wife jealous for no reason, or is she jealous because I'm acting like a jackass? Have I done things to promote jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where was I at fault? What should I have done instead? Right? And I tell guys, we're going to go a little deeper than, I shouldn't have screwed her. When they say, what should I have done, or where was I at fault? We're going to go a little deeper than that. And it says, in this way, we try to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We're looking for manifestations of self in this stuff. Was it self? And then it says, we ask God, there's another one, to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. We remembered that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. That's why, it's kind of funny. When you start having kids, you find out that some of the stuff your parents told you was just straight up BS, and for our own convenience. And one time, we're out by the pool, and we've all had barbecue, and the kids are, we brought the kids in and we're eating, and my daughter wanted to go back in the pool. And I said, "Oh, honey, you can't swim for an hour after you eat, because you'll get cramps." And I heard that, and I go, what a crock, it's like, not only have I never had cramps, I've never known anybody that knew anybody that had cramps, It's just a story we tell the kids because we don't want to have to watch them for an hour after we eat, I've just eaten and I don't want to have to mess with it. And I think it's the same reason we tell guys, don't get into a relationship for a year after you get sober, We don't know whether it works or not because nobody's ever tried it. But it's not that we don't want, it's just as a sponsor, I don't want to have to hear about it. If you get into a relationship, I got to work my ass off with you, so like, you really shouldn't go swimming for an hour after you eat, just saying. But, when it says we're not to be the arbiter of anybody's sex life, really, on day 366, I'm ready for a relationship, I'll tell guys, I go, man, you can get in a relationship if you want, but you better put your seatbelt on, you're going to have to work this deal at a whole nother level. And, I got one sponsor right now that's got his tit in the ringer, and God almighty, is he having to do some work, And it's funny because as a sponsor, I'm sitting there going, I got my opinion and I got my experience. My opinion says you should get out of this deal. It's not the right deal for you, and it's crazy. It's going to be a lifetime of misery. But then I also got my experience that says you can't hear a word I'm saying. So I said, I'll walk 100 miles down that road with you, but I'm conflicted on my advice, with you. But, it says we shape this sane and sound ideal, and it says whatever our ideal turns out to be, we got to be willing to grow towards it. We got to be willing to make amends where we've done harm. And it says we treat sex like we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. And there's a little prayer over here on page 70 called the sex prayer. And it talks about what happens if I fall short. And when it says, it's in the middle of the page, the second new paragraph on page 70, it says, to sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal. God, please show me the right ideal with this stuff. We pray for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, and for the strength to do the right thing. I always tell my guys, I go, man, that guidance in each questionable situation, it's got to start way up the line. It's got to start. I'm a married guy. It's got to start as soon as she starts flirting with me. The chick at the club or the chick at the, because what I want to do is I want to push it right up to the edge of the cliff. And when I'm saying, God, give me guidance in each questionable situation, I got the key to the motel room, and I'm going, God, if you don't want this to happen, don't let this key work. It's like the horse is out of the barn at that point, It's like I've said the same thing about guys. Internet pornography is a huge problem with men in sobriety. I'm not looking at anybody. I haven't talked to anybody, but I've had some struggles with it, and there were times where I was carrying a card around that said, God, show me the right ideal. Give me guidance in each questionable situation. Give me sanity, soundness of mind, and the strength to do the right thing. And I've told guys in sponsor, that are having trouble with that stuff, I go, you carry that around on a card, but I'm telling you, you can't wait till you've logged on and it's too late then. It's when the imperious urge is just starting. That's when I have to do it. And these things, these tools work with so many things. It'll work with internet porn. It'll work with gambling. It'll work with stuff. I had a problem with the internet poker one time. I could not stop playing internet poker. Right? And you talk about current agnosticism. Every morning I'd say, that's it, I'm not doing this anymore. And then that night about 10 o'clock, I'd go, well, it wouldn't hurt to look at a few hands, and next thing you know, it's 4:30 in the morning and I got 17 cigarette butts in the ashtray. And the next day I feel like I'm, got a hangover and I'm going, that's it. And then that night I'm back on there again, and this is going on day after day. And I called up my buddy Tom up in Dallas and I said, Tom, I can't quit. And he goes, are you ready to quit for good? And I said, yeah. And he goes, get down on your knees. Whew. He said, get down on your knees and ask God to remove the obsession. And I was like, really? And he goes, dude, that is a no-brainer for God. He goes, if God can handle whiskey and heroin, he can handle internet poker, but it had never occurred to me to take it to God. And if we talk any about the 6 and 7, this session's over, isn't it? What time did we start? 1:30, 2:30? We'll give just a couple more minutes. I wanted to do 4, 5, 6, and 7. Because what happens is, with a lot of us, this inventory process can subtly turn into an exercise in self-will. The inventory process, Katie says it's like a golf swing. 4 through 9. 4 through 9, just like this. And what I tend to do is I want to do 4 and 5, and I look at it from an entirely different angle, and then I go, whoa, good thing I caught myself. I was off the beam there for a minute, but I got it now. And subtly, it has turned into an exercise in self-will, and God doesn't have anything to do with it. Have you ever seen Charles Barkley swing a golf club? Oh my God! You have got to YouTube Charles Barkley golf swing. You'll wet your pants. I mean, it's like he draws with the best lessons. He draws the club back and he goes, I like that. And I'm telling you, you'll wet your pants. You got to see it. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. That's what I do though when I stop at 4 and 5. And what the process really is supposed to be is in 4. I write it down and I look at it from all this stuff, and then I go to another person and we talk about it and we look from an entirely different angle. What step 6 is all about is lack of power and it being objectionable. The stuff that I've found in this inventory, in step 6, I take it in there and I admit that it's objectionable. There's a lot of things in my life that it doesn't matter if you think it's objectionable. It's when I think it's objectionable that it becomes a real piece of business between me and God. You could think I'm an asshole, and I'm like, well, that's just the way I am. But when I become aware of this behavior and the way it's affecting other people, and it becomes objectionable to me, that's a big piece of it, is it objectionable or not? And the second piece of it is I don't have the power to do any different. That's what I'm doing in step 6, is I'm looking at this stuff, and I'm taking it in there and I'm saying, this is really objectionable to me, God, and I don't have the power to do it any different. And then I take it in step 7 to God and I say, my Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, the good and the bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. That's 6 and 7, and then I go out and I start making amends for the damages I've done with this selfish behavior. But this 4, 5, 6, and 7 and I hear a lot of people say, well, you got to have the 12 and 12 for 6 and 7 because it's just 2 little paragraphs in the big book. But the reason it's just 2 little paragraphs in the big book is because I've spent 75 pages preparing for those 2 little paragraphs. I've looked at this stuff and I've seen it from a different angle, and I'm going, do I admit it's objectionable and I don't have the power? And then I take it to God, and I even let God decide which of my character defects he's going to remove and which ones he isn't. I don't know. I mean, I know one thing. If he made me completely defect free, I wouldn't be worth a flip working with new guys. Sometimes they got to be able to see some of these defects to know, I remember the first time Ed O'Donnell, this guy, he had 25 years, and I watched him work on his Harley, and he threw a open-end wrench through the sheetrock in his garage. And I thought, I might be able to do this deal. I if that'll pass for 25 years, I'm in, but I'm asking God to remove these defects and that sort of thing. It's a powerful piece of the exercise, but this inventory process has taken on such a new life for me that I missed for so long. I mean, I don't even know how to, a lot of it comes from just hearing a lot of inventory. I hear a lot of inventory. I sponsor a bunch of guys, and we hear a bunch of inventory. And this is the sort of thing that can, when you got that new guy, you can show him that there's a different level of doing this deal. Having a guy, I hope to talk about it, but I got 2 minutes. I want to say one thing real quick. Katie was doing a talk in out of state, and this guy came up to me and he says, "Can I talk?" And I said, "Yeah." And we go over it, and he goes, "I'm not doing very good." And I said, "Well, what's up?" And he goes, "I'm 16 years sober." And he goes, "I'm not thinking about drinking or anything." He goes, "But I can't shake this thought of killing myself." That's untreated alcoholism. That's what I'm talking about, walking around in the middle of these rooms with a level of desperation and pain that I'm not going to tell anybody about. And he's like, "I'm not thinking about drinking, but I can't shake the idea of killing myself." And being able to tell that guy that there's a level of this work that he's never experienced is a powerful message. It's a powerful thing to get to experience. I mean, I don't know which is cooler, being able to have a spiritual awakening from this stuff, or being able to show somebody else how to kick it up to another level. And I love these conversations, and I love anybody that's willing to sit around and talk about it. And, we're going to take a while off tonight, and we'll get back tomorrow morning and talk about the amends process and the spiritual disciplines of 10 and 11. But I really want to thank you guys for hanging in there today, and thanks for listening to me.
Thank you for listening to Sober Sunrise. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a thumbs up, as it will help share the message. Until next time, have a great day.